Greetings, audiophiles and Mass Effect fans. Welcome to my reading of my fanfiction, After the Fall. This is a Mass Effect fanfiction, and as such, most of the characters and the universe belong to BioWare/EA Games. No copyright infringement is intended. However, the scenario and occurrences within this fanfiction are my intellectual property, so if you decide you want to share this with someone, credit me. Please. Part 10. Earthborn. The most dangerous thing about running with the gang wasn't the police. It was the other gangs. The Reds had a few enemies in other youth gangs which supported alien rights, or hated the Reds for less substantial reasons. Shepard had participated in several battles against rival gangs in her time. She had taken a bullet grazed to her shoulder in one such skirmish, and wore the scar proudly. Now there were many scars beside that one. The moment of its acquisition was almost forgotten. The Reds had been trading poor attempts at subtle sniping with a rival gang called the Spirits, which fancied themselves Turian lovers. Shepard guessed that the gang had known little to nothing about Turians, but they wore their hair spiked back like a fringe and painted their faces. Some even taped their fingers together to look as though they only had two on each hand. The Reds hated everything to do with the Spirits. Shepard had been 14, the second in command of the Reds. Their leader was a brash, wild, and unstable 19-year-old named Blaze. He was renowned for his lack of mercy and tendency towards seemingly random hate crimes. He had plans for the gang, however. He had lofty goals for them, claiming that one day they would be one of Earth's most powerful gangs. Everyone feared and admired Blaze. Shepard, while somewhat unpredictable herself, had a natural affinity for structure, tactics, and logic. While Blaze was shouting about his hatred, Shepard was the mind organizing all the attacks. She was put in charge of planning for a large skirmish. She'd plotted out a kill sack, an old warehouse with a perfect vantage point for them to snipe the Spirits from above. They would lure the Spirits into the trap, then massacre them, cripple them so badly that they would never be able to rebuild. Everything was perfect. The setup was flawless. What Shepard couldn't predict was that one of the Reds would defect. He warned the Spirits about the ambush, so they had laid a trap of their own. What should have been a swift and decisive blow against the Spirits turned into an ugly, confusing, and bloody battle. Shepard soon found herself fighting on the floor of the warehouse. She was supposed to be in the rafters, sniping, but she'd been driven down to the floor. Her weapon had overheated, and her lack of battle experience had caused her to drop it in surprise. Someone else scooped it up before she could react, and she'd been forced to run for cover before the weapon cooled and she was shot full of holes. As it was, she took a deep graze to her shoulder. She'd never actually been shot before. It was startling, the pain and the heat of her own blood. She hadn't expected it to hurt so much, or to make her so angry. It was like someone had lit a fire inside her chest. She covered behind a fallen metal beam until she heard her weapon overheat again. Counting on the relative inexperience of the child who was attacking her, she acted. He'd been young, perhaps only her age. She launched herself over her hiding place towards the boy. He looked up as she charged. His face was covered in smeared war paint. Shepard's rage flooded from her and she tackled him. He yelped almost like a puppy as she took her fists to him, beat him senseless, and recovered her weapon, just in time to shoot one of the boy's friends who was running in her direction. She heard someone yelling for help. She scanned the battlefield. She was young, this was her first real battle, and she was unused to assessing combat situations. However, her brain was very quick when it came to learning on the fly. Reading and writing had challenged her, but she never learned as well from books as from experience. Sometimes it felt like her mind was flying along at about 100 miles per hour, whereas the words in the page merely crawled. Her dark eyes took in the warehouse. It would have seemed chaos to the casual viewer, but she could make sense of it. For the most part, the Reds were winning. It was far bloodier than intended, but they were winning. Then she spied the person who had yelled. A young man, perhaps a few years older than she, was being cornered by 3 spirits. She couldn't remember the boy's name, but he was on her side, and he was in trouble, so she went after him. She had the advantage. She had a gun. While most youth gangs were armed, it was difficult to get your hands on firearms. The Reds were lucky to have the arsenal that they did. Shepard made her first kill, then her second and third in rapid succession. The boy she had saved looked up at her with horror on his face, mingling with the blood spattered from his fallen foes. It took Shepard's brain a moment to catch up. She wasn't used to that. She'd never killed anyone before. Her mind seemed to lock up. She just stood, smoking gun in her hands, staring at the bodies. She little noticed as she was slammed to earth by the boy she had saved. Shots flew over their heads. Shepard's head hit the floor with an ugly crack, and she mercifully passed out. Later, she had woken to the sound of shouting. She turned her aching head to see that she was back in the Reds' HQ. Blaze was screaming at that boy she'd saved. He was easily dwarfed by the much older boy, but he was standing his ground. Blaze threatened, waved his arms, and swore. Shepard had learned most of her favorite cussing from Blaze. It took her fogged, aching mind time to realize that Blaze was screaming about her, how she'd failed the mission. It was her fault that they had lost so many people. The boy she had saved was standing up for her, staring down Blaze, not letting the older boy reach Shepard to personally bawl her out, and also beat her up. Blaze eventually shouted himself out. Shepard noticed that their leader was bleeding as well, and it was probably Blaze's wounds that had saved the younger boy from getting the shit kicked out of him. He'd come over to see her where she lay in her bed made out of crates and an old mattress. "My name's Richter," he'd said. Shortly after that, she and Richter had become a couple. Also, following that day, Shepard began having nightmares. Her dreams were always filled with visions of her first kills, until greater trauma came along to replace those visions with even more horrors. "I'll inform the Alliance," Traynor said calmly. "They'll round up this Richter fellow and soon have Major Kirahi back." "No." Shepard was still staring at the frozen image of the man's face. "Commander?" Traynor asked, stopping with her fingers hovering over the button she was about to press. "He wants to see me. I'll go. I can talk him down. If we send in the Alliance, it'll get ugly. I'll take James and Caden. We'll settle this." "Shepard, are you sure?" Tally asked, concern clear in her voice. "I can do this little thing," Shepard said, a creeping weariness in her tone. She was tired of being injured and tired of feeling guilty. Better to have her boots on the ground and see to a situation herself. "Suit up, Caden. Traynor, inform Mr. Vega. We're going planet-side in 20. "Yes, ma'am," Traynor said. She knew better than to argue, even if she didn't sound completely happy with the situation. Shepard turned and expected Tally to try and stop her, convince her not to go. Instead, the quarian simply dipped her head in a respectful gesture. "I'll be in engineering, communicating with the migrant fleet. With any luck, we'll have the whole situation sorted by the time you get back." Shepard headed for the lower decks again, intent on suiting up in her armor. It struck her that her usual armor had been incinerated by the Reaper blast. Her lip curled in annoyance as she looked over her choices. She had always favored black and blood red as her personal colors. She looked over the uniform gray suits, trying to decide which would fit best. "Shepard." Garrus's voice startled her. She cursed under her breath. She had been hoping she'd be off the ship by the time someone told Garrus she was going. "Tally?" she asked, picking up a helmet and trying it on. It felt too big, but then she remembered she had less hair now. Tally didn't say anything, Garrus assured her. It was Joker. "Damn it, Jeff," Shepard growled, selecting a chest plate and trying it against her chest. Too much space in the breast area. Shepard shook her head. She'd always been muscular and lean rather than well endowed. "He's worried about you," Garrus said, walking up beside her. "When were you going to tell me?" "When I got back, at the earliest," Shepard admitted, not making eye contact with her mate. "Didn't I just get a lecture last night about keeping things from you?" His tone still sounded playful rather than upset. "Whose ship is this again?" She gave him a smile. Whose mate for life am I again? He helped her buckle on the shoulder pauldron. You all right with me going? She asked, sitting down and loosening the straps on her leg braces. Well, I was, until just now. What are you doing? He demanded, kneeling and stopping her hands with his own. I can't wear these under the armor. You can if you wear a few sizes too big. He went and picked out new greaves for her. Are you kidding? I'll drown in those. She waved her hand dismissively. You can't walk around all day without the braces. Garrus raised his eyebrow scale. I think I can. I mean, the armor braces my legs somewhat. I'll just take an extra pain pill and be fine. She finished with the brace and tugged it free of her scarred limb, tossing it further than she needed to. The hated piece of metal and leather skittered across the floor. She began to work at the other. Shepard, Garrus warned. This is going to set you back. You could do permanent damage to yourself. Garrus, they're my legs, she snapped, sending the other brace flying. I'll be fine. Garrus put the 2 large greaves he had found for her back on the rack. He gave her a hard look. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep up this woman of steel routine. Even if it's working? The words felt strangely bitter on her tongue. Even then, Garrus sounded weary. He rubbed the back of his neck. The galaxy can't see those, she gestured towards the leg braces. They have to see this. She stood up. Her legs protested, but not as badly as she had feared. Shepard, you know better than anyone how messed up I am. He tried a different tactic. That's one of the things that drew us together. We're messed up. Mentally, physically. If I can admit that, I can too, Shepard finished, her voice hard. I shouldn't be a big hero. I shouldn't be leading the victory fleet. I'm the one that got them stuck out here in the first place. I don't have a choice, Garrus. This, she gestured to herself, now fully armored in the plain gray, this is who I am to them. You know the other side of me, but this is who I have to be today. Garrus seemed to understand. He shook his head nonetheless. I wish I could go with you. I understand why I can't, but that doesn't stop me from wanting to have your back always. You're my mate now, she gave him a wan smile. You always have my back, I know that. Are you ready, Commander? Trainer's voice was on the intercom. I'll be right there, Shepard responded, selecting her weapons. Wait. Garrus walked into an alcove where the crew's preferred arms were kept for easy access. He returned and held something out to Shepard. Oh, Garrus, are you sure? She gently took the elegant sniper rifle. I think Vera will be safe with you, Garrus said. And she'll keep you safe. Thank you, love, Shepard exclaimed. She stood on tiptoe and kissed Garrus. Then she left the bay. Heading for the shuttle, she was careful not to limp. Shepard felt the familiar rattle and pitch as the shuttle hit Atmo. Those coordinates your buddy gave us have us setting down in Bath, Steve called back from his position in the pilot seat. I didn't know the Reds were a British gang, said Caden, who sat with his helmet between his knees, like a soldier in a crowded transport rather than a roomy shuttle. They're not, Shepard said. We originated in Chicago. I even had a little bit of an accent for a while. Either the gang has gotten a lot bigger, or they came over to the Isles for some other reason. We're almost at the landing site. Any last instructions? Steve asked. Be cautious, Shepard said, watching as Caden and James put their helmets on and readied their weapons. We're far from a Reaper Corps, but you never know who may have been exposed to indoctrination before the Krogan quarantined the areas. Also, don't trust the Reds. They may have been my old gang, but I said goodbye to them a long time ago. I couldn't have pictured you running with a gang, Lola. James chuckled as he checked his rifle's heat clip. That is, until I tried to box with you. You bare-knuckle box like a pro. Been fighting all my life. She couldn't resist a cocky smile as the shuttle doors opened and the air of Earth rushed in. She didn't have the face mask down on her helmet and got a noseful. She smiled. One thing she still missed about being planet-side. The air on the Normandy was too purified, too recycled and processed. The air on Earth was full of dust. Stagnant and beautiful smells filled her nose at the same time. She was almost distracted from the armed people who stood waiting for her. "The Reds look good," she thought as she eyed her greeting committee. They had uniform armor and weapons, though both the men sported a red bandana each. One had it tied around his upper arm, the other around the barrel of his weapon. At first the men seemed unsure, as she and her fellow soldiers stepped from the shuttle. "I'm Commander Shepard," Shepard announced. She knew she looked like a fresh-out-of-training recruit in her gray armor. The two men glanced at one another, uncertain. Shepard sighed, then reached into the collar of her armor and pulled her tags free, letting them rest against her chest. Beaten, battered, but still clearly N7 tags. This seemed enough for the men to make the decision. "This way," one of them said, jerking his head to the left, then turning to walk. Shepard gave Steve a quick nod before she and her friends followed the two men. The structure they were led to looked as though it had been some sort of government building, abandoned when the war parked itself on Earth. It was still fairly intact, Shepard noticed. Only one of the large windows was shattered, though a few had cracks. Inside they were ushered to a side room. Shepard noticed that no one had asked for her weapons. She couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. They were very confident, either in that she would not attack, or that they could subdue her easily. Either way, they were probably wrong, she thought, scanning the room, the exits, the people they passed. She could feel Caden and James flanking her so closely that they were almost touching her, ready to follow the slightest cue she might give them. "Lori!" Shepard's dark eyes snapped up to meet two blue ones across the room. "So it really is you," she observed, a slight smile on her face. "What happened to Blaze?" "Dead." Richter waved his hand dismissively. "Which you would know if you ever kept in contact." Shepard knew he was being playful. Richter was seldom serious, at least when she knew him. "What are the Reds doing in Britain?" Shepard asked. "Came to fight," Richter shrugged. "Our planet was in danger. Everyone with a gun came to help out." "I hate to ruin this reunion with business, but I believe you have one of my men?" Shepard asked, careful to hide any hint of tenseness in her voice. The muscles in her legs were already starting to throb. Was it from standing, or from being ready to move at any moment? Richter's face hardened. "Right down to business. You really are the great Commander Shepard. The one on all the cereal boxes. The one all the kids want to be." "I'm quite an example," Shepard replied sarcastically. "My man?" she pressed. "Not exactly a man," said Richter. He had a handsome face, rounded, with well-proportioned features and bright eyes. Now it twisted in disgust. "Is it true what I've been hearing? You're the reason all these alien races are on Earth?" "I am," Shepard said, her tone firm. "I see you haven't changed your opinion about them, even if they did help save this planet." "Yeah, that went really well." Sarcasm dripped from Richter's words. "Now they're all here, eating our food, taking up our space. Even if they all leave tomorrow, we'll have a lot more to rebuild because of them here using our resources. That's what I want to talk about. We, the residents of Earth, would like to be given first priority." "So you would see the other species starve so you can fill your bellies a little more?" Caden spoke over Shepard's shoulder. Richter seemed surprised, locking eyes with Biotic. "You're human too. You want to see your planet stripped and left to die? I'll tell you what I don't want to see. Starving is sorry, emaciated Krogan. You don't want to see that either, because Krogan dying of hunger will eat just about anything, including you," Caden said, before Shepard raised her hand and he fell silent. "My man," Shepard said again, enunciating each word as though she spoke to someone who was a little slow. Richter rolled his eyes. "All business, eh, Lori?" "You used to be more fun." He gave her a playful wink. She ignored it. Richter had been a fun boyfriend, joking but intelligent. She wasn't surprised he had become the leader after Blaze's death. Richter had always been charismatic. Even when they were young, the older children had looked to Shepard and Richter as unofficial leaders of the Reds. She hadn't really discussed her leaving for the military with Richter. Just informed him one day that they would no longer be a couple. She still felt a little guilty about that. Richter gestured, and one of his cronies pushed a button. The far wall of the room, it turned out, was a false one. It folded itself away with a mechanical whir. There was Kirrahe, still strapped to the chair, slumped in what was either unconsciousness or death. It took a lot of willpower not to rush to the Solarian side. Shepard kept her cool. I need to check him. If he's dead, all negotiations are off. Fine, Richter gestured with his arm. Shepard shot her Mane, lag behind me, glance, and strode forward, even as her legs protested. She showed no outward hint of pain as she approached the Solarian. The chair her friend had been strapped to was too small for him. His long legs were splayed awkwardly to the sides. Gently she lifted his chin with one hand, her Omni tool springing to life with the other. Life signs, she exhaled gratefully. Kirrahe? Major, can you hear me? The Solarian's bruised eyes did not open. There was dried blood around his thin lips. She wasn't sure of what other injuries he might have. You're done, Richter said, stepping forward. Just as Shepard was about to move away, Kirrahe's lips moved fractionally, and his eyes opened in twin slits. He spoke one word, very softly, so only she could hear. Trap.